Welcome to Future Foodcast. I'm Pam Linemiller, your host. I'm so excited today to dive into what happens with our farmers and actually growing food, and especially here in America. We have two guests with us today, so you have an added bonus here on Future Foodcast. We have Alex Dunn. She is the president and CEO for CropLife America. And we have Manojit Basu, and he is the Vice President of Science Policy. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much, Pam. It's great to be here.
We are delighted to have both of you. I guess, Alex, would you like to tell us about CropLife America and how you work, what you do, and what your mission is?
Well, Pam, it's great to be here. CropLife America was founded in 1933. We've had a variety of names over the years, but we've been CropLife America for quite some time. We represent the full range of pesticide manufacturing in the United States. So that includes the companies that develop, manufacture, formulate, and distribute throughout the country plant science solutions. These include nearly all the organic and non-organic pesticide and biotechnology products used across the United States.
Wow, that is quite a lot of responsibility. So what is your mission with that, or what is your task at hand? What's your outreach?
Well, we're based here in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., just right across the bridge from the nation's capital. Being based here, of course, gives you a good idea of what we're all about. We are advocates, and we advocate on behalf of the pesticide industry at both the federal and the state levels to really make sure that legislators, regulators, and decision makers across the country understand our industry, understand what pesticide products do, how they're regulated, how they are very carefully studied and carefully assessed by the United States Environmental Protection Agency, how laws apply to them, that it's not a free-for-all by any means when it comes to how a pesticide comes to market and is able to be used. There's multiple layers of regulation. So we are advocates, but also we are educators. And we want to make sure that elected officials and stakeholders across the spectrum really understand why pesticides are used. I mean, in many cases, people understand why we use medication when we, as a person, feel under the weather and get sick. We'll take a medication to feel better and to heal. Well, a crop can also get sick. It can get an illness, can be a virus, a fungus. It can be an infestation of insects. It could be also any other type of invasion of a grass that shouldn't be in the way. And so we are able to, through pesticides, herbicides, and insecticides, treat essentially the problem in the crop. Things that 100 years ago would have meant the full loss of the crop today means that the crop can survive that illness and thrive.
Wow, that's exciting that we can be so prescriptive about that. And I bet that's where Manojit comes in with his Vice President of Science Policy to try to help figure some of those things out. Because in general, what we hear is, oh no, we want to use less pesticides. But the reality is that science has allowed us to move forward. So we don't have to just spray everything that's out there in the field, right, Manojit? Why don't you explain a little bit about your job?
Yes, and thank you, Pam, for having us on this show. Really appreciate this opportunity. And Alex put it very nicely that, we use medication when someone's not feeling well, the same way pesticides are used to treat pests. Now, what happens is we represent a lot of our scientific, science-based, innovation-driven companies, and it takes a lot of innovation for a pesticide to come to the marketplace. If I, as a company, found a chemistry which targeted a specific pest today, it would be 12 years from now before that pesticide can hit the marketplace. So it is a 12-year-long process. And it's like really finding a needle in a haystack because companies are evaluating tens and thousands of chemistries to find that one perfect chemistry, which eliminates the pest but does not have effect on the plant itself, does not have effect on the non-target species that are out there, or does not have any adverse effect on an environment and humans who may consume that food. So it's a very, very specific target chemistry that you're looking for. And for us to innovate, it requires a lot of science, it requires a lot of safety studies before these companies can bring something to the marketplace. And what the pesticides allow is for the productivity to be maintained. We know food security is a big issue. There are a lot of geopolitical challenges that we see in today's world. Climate change is a big problem for us. Under those kind of circumstances, what we need is productivity to be maintained, number one, to continue feeding what we are at 8 billion plus today. Soon, some estimates say that by 2050, we will be at 9 billion. To feed the population of 9 billion around the world, you need to maintain that productivity. You need to be efficient because land resource is not expanding. We still need to get our food from the same amount of land, or maybe even less, as some of the land is utilized for urbanization and other things. So how do we produce more with less? And that's where pesticides come into play, where they're enabling growers to maintain more and more of their produce safe, away from the pest, which in the past could have damaged 70, 80, 100% of the crop. Pesticide enable reducing that crop loss that could happen because of insect pests.
Yeah,
so that is pesticides play.
Thanks for reframing how some of our audience might be thinking about pesticides, Manojit, because often we're thinking they're a negative, but reality is they're enabling us to keep our production up by being able to treat at a smaller scale, maybe a problem before it takes over the entire crop. So I think that's a distinguishing item right there.
Absolutely, that's right. If you look at productivity in the United States from the 60s to today, it has doubled in almost all crops. And the reason for doubling or tripling of the productivity, three main factors. One is, of course, the genetics that goes behind these crops. There's been a lot of improvement. The second most important factor is pesticides and pest management. Because of the pest management practices that we have been able to adopt, the newer chemistries that have come into the marketplaces, those losses have been reduced over time. And third, certainly, are the agronomic practices. Without these three, we probably wouldn't have been able to achieve the food security that we have in the US.
Well, at CropLife America too, you talked about research, and I know Alex, I don't know if you sponsor the research or you just work with the results of the research. I know you mentioned sustainability and.
Yeah, I'd love to tell you a little bit about that. So we often partner, often it's good to have a neutral partner doing the research. So we work a lot with universities and academics. There are colleges and universities across this nation that are producing some of the best and brightest new scientists in agriculture today. We had some wonderful interns this summer who are working their way through their master's degrees in agriculture and agricultural economics and soil science and weed science and entomology, things that many of us probably never thought about studying, but we should be grateful that people are doing it. And what we'll do is partner independently with the university, leaving the university researchers to do the work independently themselves, to come to their own conclusions, which is how the work should be done. We don't dictate the outcomes. We just ask them to study a particular question. So, for example, our recent life cycle assessment that Dr. Basu can tell us more about, we worked with the University of Arkansas, and we asked them to help us tell the story about how pesticides can actually advance a climate smart result. And so what if we did not use pesticides on 3 of the largest commodity crops in America. And those 3 large commodity crops are cotton, soybeans, and corn. And University of Arkansas had a lot of expertise in this area. And so we asked the professors if they would model various scenarios if there were no insecticides used to control insects, if there were no herbicides used to control weeds. And I'll let Dr. Basu tell you a little bit more about the results, but they were able to use a variety of 40 representative farms around the country in the 10 most productive states for those corn, soybean, and cotton crops. And using all of that data, they came to some pretty impressive outcomes. And I'll, again, let you and Dr. Basu talk a little bit more about that.
Thanks, Alex. And as I was mentioning earlier, we represent some of the most innovative companies in the world. And you cannot be innovative if science is not in your DNA or at your core. So we pride ourselves with the science and research. And I've been very fortunate at CropLife to collaborate with academics within the US, around the world, on progressing some of the science, our understanding where pesticides play a role, and the research Alex just mentioned, that was the complete life cycle assessment from cradle to farm gate. So as the pesticides are manufactured to the commodity being out of the farm gate, on what happens to the production, to the economics, as well as, most importantly, our focus around some of the climate parameters. We hear a lot with climate change that agriculture plays a significant role in emissions. Pesticides have some role. We really wanted to understand, and majority of our research focus is a hypothesis-driven focus, saying, let's see what is the impact. We don't know what the end result is. We collaborate with academic and say, let's find out. And they went through this enormous data set from USDA, from public sources, some additional publication. We did an extensive literature review of what's out there first. Once that was taken and the data was computed in these models that have been established for years, we then looked into, okay, what exactly is going on? Several of the literature review provided us enough results to document that, yes, there is a significant yield impact when you remove any insecticide, herbicide, or fungicide from treating your disease or managing insect pest or weed. We knew that. There were evidences in the literature. But what actually happens to greenhouse gas emissions? What happens to the global warming potential? What happens to water use? What happens to land use? How much land would be required to maintain the same productivity and taken out of maybe forestry or somewhere else, negatively impacting biodiversity? Some of those key elements were where we were interested in. And the results were fascinating. We are looking at least 2 peer-reviewed publications based on the work that has been done. But as a first step, what we did is we completed an ISO-reviewed life cycle assessment, which went through the entire ISO process on how the analysis was done, what kind of data was taken into account, the questions and the answers. So having that ISO review gave us the confidence that this is a thoroughly conducted research. And now we are working on peer-reviewed publication. Just to give you some example, what the research found is cultivating corn, cotton, and soybean without pesticide resulted in 3 times more land, water, and energy use, as well as greenhouse gas emission. So if you take those pesticides out and have manual weed control or other forms of insect pest control, that's what you will see impact on land use, water use, energy use, greenhouse gas emissions to maintain the productivity level. Wow. These results, this kind of research was not done before, and this is what we bring to table for our advocacy purposes.
Yeah, what I hear that's most important about that, honestly, is asking the right questions. I don't know that people asked the questions before about the impact on land use, water use, greenhouse gases and the other variables that you wanted to know about. And so that's excellent that you were able to get that output and realize that, to your initial point, the use of pesticides allows you to maximize the use of your land and your water and minimize the greenhouse gases. And that's exciting. The peer-reviewed papers will be coming out when they go through. That's quite a long process, as well as those who are in the scientific area might know, right?
Yes, it could take 6 months, a year, and that's why the results were so interesting. We wanted to have something in between. That's where we opted for the ISO review process.
Yeah. Well, and with the pesticides, you talked also about precision agriculture, and you had an example there. I don't know if this is a good place to share that with our audience.
Yes. Over the time, what has happened is, again, I mentioned agronomic practices, which came in, and another driver for increasing productivity. Within those agronomic practices, precision agriculture, robotics, and we hear a lot about artificial intelligence, AI these days. All of that is coming into play. Agriculture is right now going through a transformation with technology, hardware, robotics coming in. And technology has evolved to a place where no longer growers are looking at applying a herbicide through the entire crop. There are these robots, whether they are tractor-driven or autonomous, going through the field, identifying whether this is a corn plant or whether this is a weed, which should not be there. And in the instant a decision is being made, this is a corn plant, we don't need to spray anything, or this is a weed, this doesn't need to be here, and the pesticides being applied specifically on that plant. These kind of precision agriculture applications that we see now and will continue to see for the rest of our lives are driving in productivity and reducing costs for the growers, because at the end of the day, farmers are not applying pesticides. The notion that farmers just keep applying pesticide, that's never the case, because these are not free commodities, free products. They cost a lot. So why would I apply something that is not needed? It's always on a need basis. And if you can further reduce the use, you're improving your profit margins.
Exactly. And Alex, I know that's a lot of what your organization gets involved with, helping the farmers be the best farmers they can be, and using some of these tools and some of this technology to figure out how to best use the products.
Well, and Pam, what we like to do is partner. We really are about partners, because as I mentioned at the beginning, we work with these global innovative companies that, as Dr. Basu said, are looking for that needle in the haystack, that one in a zillion chemistries that are going to make it to market out of all of them that could be identified, that will address the latest threat to, a very productive, important crop. And our farmers are saying, here's the new problem that we see on the horizon, and they're the ones that really are telling the story about what they're facing in the field, and farming is rapidly becoming a maturing field of work in our country. I travel a lot, as does Dr. Basu. We have the honor, really, of walking around farm fields with growers, and many of them are second, third, fourth, even fifth generation farmers, and some of them are saying they're not sure that the next generation will continue to farm. It's hard work. Some of this technology that we're hearing about is going to make farming easier in many ways. I mean, these technologies are expensive. They can be financed just like you would finance a car, right? You don't have to just come out and buy the whole thing. But running a farm is hard work, and it's expensive. And as we when we get to a later part of our conversation, what we need to make sure is that our agricultural products can get to market, right? So at a good price, so that the farmers are able to see a good return on their investment. But what's super exciting is this idea of the modern way of doing agricultural business. And I like to say that most of us know that, for example, surgeons certainly don't do surgery the way they did back in the 1900s. And I think most of us are pretty glad about that.
Thankfully, yes.
There's something about agriculture and farming that people have a little bit of nostalgia for, this idea of, being on the farm and someone in overalls and kind of on the front porch. And this, the fact that agriculture is about as much technology as the modern operating room when you go in for a knee replacement and you've got a robot replacing your knee. I mean, there's a lot of innovation in agriculture, and the nostalgic view. There was a lot of downside to that nostalgia too. There was a lot of crop loss and a lot of people who went through a lot of suffering and rough seasons. So this innovation is exciting, and it just marks that what we see, the phones that we carry in our pockets today, my grandparents couldn't have imagined it. And what we see in agriculture today, farmers from 50, 60 years ago couldn't imagine a drone applying pesticides or being able to pick between a corn plant and a weed.
Yeah, it is very exciting. And to your point, we want to keep our farmers farming. I mean, it's very important to enable them to do the best job they can do at the farming. Well, and as far as farming goes, there's a lot of talk about agriculture, and in agriculture these days, regenerative agriculture. I wonder if you could address that for our audience as well, maybe how you define it, how you interact with it, and what you see as the impact of people focusing on a regenerative agriculture environment.
I can jump into regenerative agriculture. We actually published a peer-reviewed paper on regenerative agriculture, what it means, what it doesn't. But before I do that, I want to share this on the innovation piece we were talking. Please. We believe soon enough what we may see in agriculture is a Netflix-like subscription-based service. So there may be a possibility comes a time where, swarms of drones or swarms of these robotic tractors coming in, doing a piece of work that you need, whether it's application of pesticide or harvest, going and doing that work and giving you the produce or taking care of the field. No longer farmers may be required to own these machineries because you have a subscription-based service. You use them when you need them. So these concepts are being looked into and tested around the world. So again, exciting time for agriculture. And, maybe these are the kind of innovation which hopefully will keep the future generations engaged and being a farmer. So it's all heading in a right direction. Yeah. Getting back to the regenerative agriculture, it's not an easy question to answer. I have spoken with so many individuals. What does regenerative agriculture mean to you? These are, growers. These are some of the non-governmental organizations. These are food and beverage companies, up and down the value chain. What does it mean? And what I have, again, many have their own versions of definition of what regenerative agriculture is. But one thing that stood out in common with whoever I spoke and, this whole initiative we took was it's an outcomes-based agriculture. Now, what are the outcomes they are looking for? Regenerative agriculture right now is focusing on the outcomes around soil health, improved soil health, better biodiversity, and some other environmental and social parameters. From environmental parameters, you can say, greenhouse gas emissions or lower footprint. So it's that kind of outcome that's what regenerative agriculture is looking for. And if it is outcomes-based agriculture that we are looking for, do we really need to be extremely prescriptive, or do we really need to have a common definition, or do we focus on the outcomes? What are those outcomes that we need if I want better soil health, which I truly believe farmers in this country as well as around the world have been focusing on better soil health, because this is a profession, this is a tradition which has continued generations on the same piece of land and for hundreds and hundreds of years. And if you were not taking care of your soil, if you were not making the soil health better, there is no way agriculture would have continued on the same piece of land for years. So farmers have been doing those practices. There is a new term now, regenerative agriculture. Yes, we'll have to adapt to that new terminology, but I truly believe what the farmers do helps improve soil health. Cover crops and terminating cover crops and plowing them down, not tilling, because there is a lot of products that are available for zero-till, no-till agriculture. All these improve soil organic matter. All this improves soil health. Not new practices, have been going on for decades now.
Yeah, I guess the research allows us to confirm that, which maybe all the science didn't exist before. The practices were in place, but now we can actually do the testing and we can show what the outcomes are. So that's really a healthy way to be able to look at it. Thanks for bringing that forward for us. Alex, you had mentioned that we were going to circle back around. I think you were talking about some global, I know you have a large view of what's going on in this space. And what else would you like to share with our audience?
Well, I think a good way to kind of start tying up the ends of this conversation is to think about the fact that the United States, really, we are so fortunate to have one of the safest and most abundant food supplies in the world. Most people on a given day walk into their grocery store and hopefully they are able to afford to fill their carts with healthy, abundant, fresh produce, and they don't really think about how it gets there. I know when I started working in agriculture, my suburban children were in their teens, and I started talking about things I was learning at the office, and they had never thought at all about how their lettuce got in that bag with the dressing and the croutons so that they could make a salad, right? They hadn't thought about how, all of that, fresh avocado got to the local Chipotle, right? So, this is something that often people take for granted, again, is that food is there and it's fresh and it doesn't make them sick, right? And so, again, we do this through partners, through all the grower groups that we work with. But what we also want to emphasize is not that we keep a lot of the food here in the United States to feed our own people, but that the U.S. is the second largest food and agricultural exporter by value. And 20% of what we grow in the U.S. is exported. And for certain crops, it's even higher than 20%. And that supports a lot of jobs in the U.S. as well. So, trade, agricultural trade, we could have a whole separate episode of your foodcast about trade. I did think it was important to just touch on the fact that American grown food is in demand in other countries. Countries want American grown food. They know it is high quality. They are willing to pay for the premium for it to come to them. And that also creates a lot of jobs in the whole cycle. I talked about the farmer, but then you think about that whole sector of what it takes to get those crops into containers, into trains, and onto 18-wheelers to the ports, timely, exported onto ships and, around the world and to other countries. So we are able with our agricultural industry in the United States to employ over 48 million people total. So while I said there are fewer farmers, and maybe some of these technologies will allow us to be more efficient with the the boots on the ground farmers. There's a whole lot of other jobs related to agriculture as a sector that I thought we should highlight as we kind of talk about this whole space that we're in.
Yeah, and thank you for doing that, because really the entire supply chain benefits when we are raising crops and food that is, there's a demand for it, not only here in the United States, but in other countries. As you mentioned, there's not just those farmers, like you said, but the entire supply chain that you detailed out there, getting the food from the source to the end consumer. And if you've traveled internationally, I know you have, you see the need, you see the difference in how the food is displayed, some of the retail situations that other countries are working with. So thank you for partnering here in the United States to continue to inform and empower, our farmers and the growers that are in this space. I mean, it's so important. Manojit, do you have anything you'd like to leave our audience with?
Thank you again for having us. I would say from a pesticide safety point of view, each and every pesticide goes through a robust risk assessment process where EPA could ask up to 150 different studies for reviewing these pesticides. It takes 10, 12 years to get a new product in use. These are evaluated with the highest standards in science, and they are safe to use as directed. There should not be any concerns around pesticides which are approved for use in the United States by US EPA and registered in the state, and the residues found in food crops.
Yeah, thank you for that message. I, for one, and maybe a lot of our audience, had no idea it took maybe up to a dozen years to actually get a product approved in the pesticide or herbicide market. That is just astonishing to me. And I guess good, to know that it's fully vetted, it is a positive for us as consumers. And I think that's your point. But I really appreciate you, Dr. Okay, I'm going to re-record that. I really appreciate you, Dr. Manojit Basu, and also Alex Dunn from CropLife America, for being on our show and sharing all this great knowledge. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pam.
And for our listeners and viewers on YouTube, thank you for listening and viewing. Please leave us a comment. Let us know what you thought about this episode. If you've got some questions, we answer every one and we'll forward them on. And I encourage you to subscribe to us so you don't miss next week's episode. Until then, I'm Pam Line-Miller.
Thanks for listening to Future Foodcast. Future Foodcast is powered by Farm to Plate, the leading food blockchain platform. Subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date with the very latest innovations in the food industry.